All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mike to New Haven podcast. This is episode 99. We are closing in on the century mark, one away from the big milestone episode. If you haven't checked out episode 98, it was great. I had the chance to speak with retired NYPD Intelligence Division Sergeant Christopher Strom, who also worked in the Counterterrorism Division as well, and is an author of the book Brooklyn to Baghdad. After he retired from the NYPD, he went out to Iraq to investigate and interrogate terrorists who were responsible for planting numerous IEDs throughout the region, injuring and killing soldiers. So we talked about that, and it was a really good episode. And the previous episode was a lot of fun, too. It was one of my childhood heroes, Mike Lupica, the New York Daily News, episode 97. So in episode 99, it's the continuation of a miniseries that we launched back in March with the help of my good friend Bill Ryan of the Arson Explosion Squad, called Tales from the Boom Room, Profiles of the NYPD's Arson and Explosion and Bomb Squad. And we've had a lot of great guests that have been able to come on the show, more in the works. I don't want to say who because we haven't confirmed them yet. And here today for volume 12 volumes into this miniseries, which has become such a fun project to do, is my next guest who had many a pulse-pounding and heart-stopping encounter during his time as a member of the New York City Police Department, serving 34 years from June of 1968 until August of 2002. He just about did it all. Originally as a patrolman, of course, as they all start out, he moved to the Emergency Service Unit in 1974. And staying 9 years in ESU, he would move to the Bomb Squad in 1983, where for the next 19 years, he had a front row seat to some of the most notable investigations into some of the most notorious incidents involving terrorism in New York City history. In retirement, he has stayed busy serving for a time as the spokesman for the International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators, as well as serving as a senior advisor to NYPD and law enforcement abroad. He is retired NYPD Detective First Grade Kevin Barry, and he joins us for Volume 12 of the miniseries Tales from the Boom Room, Profiles of the NYPD's Arson and Explosion and Bomb Squad. Kevin, nice to have you. Welcome. How are you?
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
Glad to have you. So first question is an easy one. You're a Long Island guy. Take me through those early years. What were they like?
We moved from Flushing, Queens, 1949 to Wantua in a development that was still being built. The last house under construction was approximately two houses north of us. To one block west was a dairy farm. And the family proceeded to enlarge up to six boys in the family. And five of them went into law enforcement later on. Went to parochial school in Belmore at St. Barnabas and then St. Francis and Wanto when they opened, then went to Seton Hall High School in Patchogue. And after that, started my working career.
Now, for a time on Long Island, this is not uncommon because you see a lot of policemen and firemen in the city. I mean, they have second jobs, and if they live out on the island, they serve as volunteers. And you were a volunteer fireman for a time out on Long Island. So take me through, I guess, catching the civil service bug to do that and how that would later correlate and help you in your police career, which we'll touch on in a moment.
I think the biggest event that got my interest in the fire department was when a military jet crashed in Wantua in the mid 1950s. It was a T-33 trainer that was trying to make his final into Mitchell Air Force Base, which is now Roosevelt Field. And the pilot lost his engine. He apparently tried to ditch in the lake just east of where he crashed, but he apparently steered it into the street in a residential area, missing the homes. And I heard the crash from a mile away, rode my bike down there and saw the disaster. And I was very impressed with the fire department response to that tragedy. And I think that's what perked my interest.
So doing that for a time, you end up taking the police test and joining the NYPD in 1968. Now, before we get to getting into the NYPD, did you take both the fire department and the police department test and the PD called you first, or did you just take the police test?
Just the police test, and it was on a bet with another friend of mine in the fire department. I passed, he didn't. He eventually joined the MTA police, and he did his 20 plus years and had a good career there too. I'm still a life member of the Wantua Fire Department.
Oh, good. So you'll still go out on calls?
No, not anymore. I'm, I guess, a senior citizen. They give you life membership. I've been over 56 years, I think it is now.
Oh, good for you. Listen, it's a token of appreciation for everything that you contributed. So, joining the NYPD in 1968, I've had a few guests on who were working during that time. Shout out to my good friend Peter Pranzo, who later was a lieutenant in street crime for many years. This was a really dangerous time to be a cop. I mean, they were assassinating cops left and right. There were many radical groups in the loose. It's not too dissimilar to now, except, as I mentioned, to when I was putting together the promo for your appearance. Now it just plays out for the most part in mean-spirited social media posts. But back then it played out in bullets. So when you were coming on during that time, take me through the training you received in the academy and just what it was like to be a rookie during that time.
Well, I was appointed on June 7th, 1968. And it was the time of trouble. It was just a few months after the assassination of Martin Luther King, and they were trying to get everybody onto the street as soon as possible. My time in the academy lasted approximately 2.5 weeks, and I was on the street before the July 4th weekend. I was assigned a temporary assignment in the tactical patrol force, and my first reporting station was the 4-1 precinct known as Fort Apache. I spent 6 months in tactical patrol force. Then I was reassigned on a temporary assignment to the 6th precinct in the West Village of Manhattan. In April of 1969, our class was brought back to the police academy to be trained.
So, I mean, you kind of learned on the fly, I guess, right?
Yeah, it was a working street knowledge, and you learned very quickly in those days.
I imagine. Kevin Barry is our guest here in the Mike Newman podcast. This is episode 99, volume 12, Tales from the Boom Room, profiles the NYPD's arson and explosion and bomb squad. So I always like to ask this to any FDNY or NYPD guest I get on. There's always senior men in the precinct or in the firehouse that help you learn the job. So who were those guys for you or gals when you came on the job?
Well, in the tactical patrol force, I was in the 23rd squad, and we had, I would say, at least 10 senior guys, and we were paired with them each different night. Very sharp guys, well-versed, taught you the tools of the trade, a lot of drug use, taught you how to go up into a building, go to the roof, cross the rooftops, and then turn around and come into the stairwells to find people that were shooting up with drugs. They also taught you when you walk down the street, you had enough distance from the building that if a sink or a toilet came flying off the roof, it wouldn't hit you.
You imagine? I mean, that you're walking down the street and talk about literally throwing the kitchen sink. That's probably where that saying comes from, chucking it out the window and voila, it's not exactly the kind of surprise you want to get. So that brings us to, of course, 1974. And you joined the emergency service unit. Now, this is one of the NYPD has quite a few elite units, but this is arguably the premier unit in the department. And to be an E-man during the 70s, when the training was vastly different, when the equipment was vastly different, what piqued your interest in the idea of going to ESU?
I think the amount of coverage I saw in the papers of all the positive things that the emergency service unit was doing. At that time, it was called the Emergency Service Division. They tried to soften that word and they became the Emergency Service District. And then later on, the Emergency Service Unit. So they've had a long career. They've been in business for a long time. And to me, it was a challenge to apply and to be accepted.
I want to show Kevin's, for context for my listeners, Kevin sent me so many great photos of his time between ESU and the bomb squad. I'm going to show some of them in a minute, but I want to ask you, because every time I get an ECOP on or an FDNY guy on who worked in one of the rescue units, I like to ask this. I hope it's improved now. I think it has, but the rivalry between ESU and the FDNY rescue units is pretty infamous. So in the 70s and early 80s, when you were in ESU, was it really hot? Was it particularly bad?
It was, but the problem was not the problem. We solved the problem, I believe, because we would go to the local fire company, rescue company usually. And those are the ones that would basically, if you want to say, be in competition. They would be the specialists coming from the fire department to the same emergency that the police emergency squad was going to. And I would go in and bring a laptop computer and show them different events that we did and explain our focus and purpose. And that became even more important when I went to the bomb squad. But several of the fellows that were in Rescue 1 were actually neighbors of mine when I lived in the village of Freeport. And when we got on the scene, I would say hello to them. The emergency cops would go, "What are you talking to them for?" I said, "They're my neighbors." I said, "I get along with them. I'll be the liaison." So we did get along.
I'll ask you because he lived out in, I think he still lives in Freeport. He was just on my show. Great guy. Do you know Paul Hassagen?
Yes.
Yeah, great guy.
And there was a funny story that I told Paul involving another Paul. I told this story before, but it's so funny. I'll tell it again. Paul Perricone, who you briefly crossed paths with in the bomb squad before he retired, that he's going up, it's like in the mid 90s, he's going up the stairs, is Perricone, and he's calling to the emergency service truck for equipment because there's an elevator that's like tilted and stuck and people are trapped. And all of a sudden, as he's going up the stairs, he hears some guy from the rescue, from Rescue 1, FDNY, calling for the same equipment. And he turns around, it's Hassagen. And they end up working the job together, and they was just fine. But it goes to show, I mean, as Perricone put it, you have these two elite units racing to get to you. So the people of the city were pretty well served because, hey, listen, you can't go wrong. They're both, have elite training. They're both very well equipped. And, if you're in a bind, it doesn't matter who comes and gets you, just as long as you get out of the situation.
Yes, I had a similar incident. I would say after I was in emergency about 7 years, they had a fire in a high rise in Midtown. And we responded to the scene because they were saying that people might be trapped in the elevators. When we got there, we started to work on the elevator door, and the fire department had come in just before us. So we stood back and we let them operate. And they took out a giant wooden crate, a big box about 3 feet wide. And they opened it up, and they had almost every elevator key in there that I had ever seen. And I looked at it, and the operator was getting up, he's taking a key and he's putting it through the keyway on the door. And he put it in and he'd turn, it wouldn't work. And he'd do another one, he'd do another one. So finally he puts a key in and he's turning it. And I said to him, "You've got the right key, but this is a facade door. It's double thickness. You have to go further in." So he turns to me and he says, "Do you think you can open this door?" I said, "No, I know I can open the door." And he pulls his key out and he says, "Go ahead." So I walk over and I take a Z wire from my kit, and I open it, push it up, and I turn and push and open the door. Open the door like this, and all of the rest of his company start laughing at him. And I turned around and then I closed the door. I said, "Now you can try it."
Oh, listen, like I said, they're both very elite trained units, but there is that butting of heads occasionally, and at least like I said, great rescues can be made. Like I said, Kevin has shared many great photos with me prior to this interview taking place today, and I want to share some of them. I'll describe them to my audience as we go. So I believe this photo here that I'm showing, and for my listening audience, the context is Kevin is in the emergency service unit. I believe an explosion has just taken place. What exactly is happening here?
That was actually on Central Park South. It was a doorman that went out to put luggage in the trunk of a cab, and somebody came in too fast and didn't stop and basically took his legs off.
Oh, wow, my God. The next photo here that I have, of course, is, I believe this is a jumper.
Yes, that was over on the west side in the Chelsea section. He had gone out on the fire escape threatening to jump. I was able to get in the floor below through one of the neighbors that was kind enough to let me through to the fire escape. And when he was distracted enough looking at the officers on the floor above, I was able to grab him and hang on to him and get him back onto the landing, the fire escape landing.
So before I show more photos, I do want to ask about that. You dealt with that a lot. People who, for whatever reason, and right now we're putting more of an emphasis on mental health, which is good, but you're responding to people who are in crisis. Either they're just got through a bad relationship, they just lost a loved one, or they're ill, whatever the problem is, financial, they're at that point where they're going to take their life. And you are there as essentially the last line of defense, trying to give them a reason to live and tell them, listen, this is not the way to go about trying to solve your problem. So, I asked this of John Lampkin when he was on, great ECOP. Check out that interview if you haven't yet for my listeners. So let's say, for example, I'm suicidal for whatever reason. The Yankees just, lost a tough one, and I'm kidding, but, I'm in a bad spot. What would you tell me to make sure that, I don't take that awful step?
Try and first get to the root cause of why that person is there and what has brought him to that state, and then try and turn around and come up and offer some different solutions to the problem and say to him, I understand your pain, but this is not the answer. What you're doing is final. It's not reversible, and you can't come back from it. I said, so you really don't want to go through with this. We will turn around and try and help you, but I need your help, and you have to make the move to come back in from where you are to safety.
And that's the right way to go about it, of course. And, you see E-men doing that every day now. This is another photo, I believe, involving a jumper that I'll show in a moment here. And we're talking about Kevin Barry here in the Mike Newman podcast, retired NYPD first grade detective who served 19 years in the bomb squad. Here is somebody who, as it describes here in the photo, as I'm reading it, she jumped before the net was in place, but she managed to land in the net, thankfully.
Yes, I'm directly above the one with the dark hair in the picture. We had set the net up above, and we had positioned 2 or 3 people, but it was during the Democratic National Convention in New York City. Mm-hmm. And the maximum manpower we got on the scene was 3 vehicles, so we only had 6 people. As we dropped the net, she turned around and leaped out the window. Fortunately, the weight of the net and the 2 fellas below holding it was enough to cause her to be caught against the building and the frame of the window. And we were able to get inside on the floor where she was and pull her back in the window. Actually, she was pulled back part of the way by her hair and her arms.
Oh, wow. So that is, again, one of the many great photos that Detective Barry sent my way. So last note on ESC before we get to your bomb squad years. You mentioned to me when we first spoke over the phone that the first bombing you responded to was the infamous Francis Tavern bombing in 1975. So for my listeners who may not recall what that event was, describe what it was and describe responding there as an econ.
I was in the emergency service division for a very short time, and I was assigned as the 3rd man on the large emergency truck. And the report of the explosion came in, and what had happened, a terrorist group, FALN, had placed a bomb in the entryway of the building. And people that were there were just having a normal lunch hour when this bomb exploded. And it killed several people. And it was my first bomb scene. And I was utterly amazed at the amount of damage that was caused, plus the amount of death and destruction, people dismembered. It was an eye opener.
This attack would kill 4. And for my listeners, I've explained this before when Don Sadawi was on, but if you didn't hear those episodes that I did with Don, the first time he was on, the FALN was a Puerto Rican terrorist group, Fuerzas Armadas para la Liberación Nacional de Puerto Rico. Their point to their cause, if you can call it that, was that they wanted independence for Puerto Rico. And instead of voting on the issue the normal way, their idea of independence was bombing the crap out of everything that they could think of. And there's a particularly chilling story involving New Year's Eve 1982, in which one of their bombs gravely injured and miraculously didn't kill 3 members of the NYPD, including 2 detectives from the bomb squad. So that segues into your arrival to the bomb squad. Now, you're not a rookie by this point. You have 15 years under your belt. So this is a transition in which you're getting close. And granted, you didn't retire when you hit 20 years. You kept going for almost another 15 years. But you're getting to that midpoint in your career. I got to say, so many E-men go into the bomb squad. Why is that? And why did you personally want to go into the bomb squad?
Well, I was asked that by psych services, because when you go into emergency, you have to be interviewed by psychological services in the police department. And then when you go to a specialized unit like the bomb squad, you have to be re-interviewed. And I basically explained to Dr. Harvey Schlossberg, who was also a police officer who got his PhD and was part of the beginning of the hostage unit with Frank Bowles. And he said to me, Kevin, why do you want to go to the bomb squad? I said, well, I'm getting on in years. I'm not as young as I used to be. I said, I'm really getting tired of climbing bridges and talking to crazy people and trying to get them to, stop from jumping from bridges out windows, tired of jacking up subway cars and putting people in body bags. I said, so I thought maybe the bomb squad would give me some new horizons. And he goes, okay, what's the real reason? And I went and I looked at him. I said, I love the noise. He said, okay.
Well, there you go. And you're in the bomb squad during the unique time where they're carrying a lot of members now. I think it's like between 30 and 40 members. But back then, I mean, there was not nearly as many guys. And this is a citywide unit. It's not like, you take Manhattan. Like the emergency service unit, for example, has trucks for each borough. So, I mean, they help each other out. If there's a large scale event, they'll go in Manhattan, they'll go help out Queens and yada, yada. Mm-hmm. But that's not the case with the bomb squad, nor the arson explosion squad. So joining during that time, this is a probationary period that you have to go through. Forgive me for my listeners that I adjust my microphone. You don't suit up right away. Take me through that probationary period of learning what it takes to be a bomb tech, especially when so many bombings are occurring in the city at this time.
Well, when I first got there, I was assigned to a team. We only had 16 people in a bomb squad. Most teams had 3 and some had 2. In order to work the chart that the bomb squad had, you had to have 2 people on duty 24/7. They worked the day shift, and the evening shift was 2 at night to 8 in the morning. It was an 18-hour shift. You also had to have a canine handler on each shift. So there was a lot of chart changes in that. I was put in a team with Danny Baldy and Ronnie McLean. Ronnie was the dog handler, and he'd been in the bomb squad for at least 10 to 15 years. I knew them both. I knew everyone in the bomb squad because when I was assigned to emergency squad 1, the bomb squad was in the same building in the police academy on the 8th floor. So we knew each other, but not only by face, but by name. And I was dispatched to the range on certain days for canine training, and then explosive recognition from the range safety officer. I went there in February. In June, end of June into July, I went to Redstone Arsenal for training, along with 2 or 3 other new recruits in the bomb squad. I came back and I was assigned to the same team in, I believe it was that fall, September, October. We had a new CO, Bill McCarthy, and he evaluated all the teams. He was adding more personnel. And before I knew it, I was told by him I was going to be the lead in the team because Danny Baldy had retired. And I said, well, there's people in the team that have 15 plus years. They said, yes, but they have not received their EOD training. They're just canine people. And he said, and I have faith in you. And I went, well, that could be your big mistake, Lieutenant. I became a team leader rather quickly, along with some other fine people like Dennis Mulcahy, Steve Dodge, and I know you know a few of the names, Jimmy Carano. The squad went larger and larger over the next 10, 12 years. We went from 3 in a team to 4 to 6 in a team. And that was 24/7. Because of a delay one time in responding to JFK Airport, the chief of department, Robert Johnston, turned around and told the bomb squad, you'll increase your capabilities so that you can provide 24/7 for any emergency. Now, I don't know the exact figures of the bomb squad. I don't think they want them known today, but they've got a lot more people than I would ever thought would have happened in the same confined space that we had with 16. So
there you go. And by the way, to Steve Dodge and Dennis Mulcahy, listen, I've had Kevin Berry's on the show right now. You see all the other guys that have been on the show. Come on the show. You know you want to. So hopefully I can talk to those guys too. I've been trying to get both of them for a while now, but we'll see what happens. So that first, I don't know if you remember your first time suiting up. But in the event that you can recall it, take me through what that was like, that first job.
Well, I'll tell you, the first time I actually suited up was when I was in emergency service, and Brian Murray was in the bomb squad. He was working alone at night, and they had a pipe bomb with 5 pounds of plastic explosive recovered in a movie theater on 14th Street. And Brian responded to the scene after we confirmed the situation. And he was placing the pipe bomb into one of the old giant mesh baskets that the bomb squad had, that was carried by 2 people, one on each side, and then put into the bomb carrier. At that time, the bomb squad was using same equipment as the emergency service division. There were the bulletproof vests made by Spooner. That was the name of the company. And it was just a flak jacket with a pair of pants, and then a face shield helmet with a slit in it, which looked like a metal burqa. So he asked me if I'd give him a hand. I suited up. We carried it out onto the back of the bomb carrier, the LaGuardia carrier, and placed it in, and it was closed up and driven to the range. And the next day it was taken care of. And it was about a month later that Brian was killed on 9/11 of 1976.
That's right. That would be the 5th squad death in the NYPD's bomb squad history. For context, as I explained before, 6 of its members, and we'll talk about number 6 a little later in the show, have died. And even, listen, 1 life lost is one too many, because as we know, life is a sacred thing. But compared to other units at the NYPD, believe it or not, the bomb squad's death toll was the lowest, which is good. Although obviously you'd prefer that these 6 individuals didn't die the way they did. So, I have to ask about this, because I don't think I've ever asked one of the guys I've had on from A&E in the bomb squad about this, but Timothy Leary, I think, set off an incendiary device on a subway train. Did you investigate that?
Not to my recollection, no.
Okay, because I remember reading about that Timothy Leary, looked that guy up for my listeners. He was a bit of a nut job, but one time he set off some incendiary device on the train, and that was one of the things that got him arrested. But at this time, you're beginning to see a shift in that domestic terror groups are kind of, I don't want to say they're completely out of the picture. They're still active. They're still to be taken seriously, but time is shifting away from the FALN, the Weather Underground, the BLA, and other radical groups, and now towards radical terror from abroad. And 1988, the Lockerbie flight explosion happens, which was later determined to be a bomb that was put on board that particular flight. 1990, the assassination of Meyer Kahane. So around this time, and of course we'll get to 1993 in a moment, but when this is happening, what was, without giving anything away, of course, what was the conversation like in the bomb squad?
Well, there was great concern after the Pan Am 103 in Lockerbie. To me, it was personal. My younger brother's brother-in-law was on the flight.
All right.
And he arrived in Lockerbie, I think the day before Christmas. And he was going to the briefings. And one of the things they learned in Lockerbie was when they did briefings, they would have somebody on the day shift do a briefing. And then on the evening shift, they'd have someone else do a second briefing. Well, if it didn't match exactly what each one said, the people in the audience felt that they were being deceived. So the first thing they learned in Lockerbie was to have one public information officer for the entire episode, which prevents changes in the story or the information being given to the public. So that people might think right away there's some type of cover-up by the authorities. My brother called me, I think it was the day after Christmas, and he said, they're not saying it's a bomb, but what type of question could I ask? So I said to him, when they get people from the Federal Aviation Administration take the floor asked them if there was any signs of spalling on any of the aircraft skin or any of the cargo containers. And I had to explain to him what spalling was, and I did. And he said, okay. So the next day at 5 o'clock, they had a briefing, and a fellow from the FAA got up there and he turns around and he said, any questions? And my brother asked, can you tell us if there's any evidence of spalling on any of the aircraft skin or cargo containers? And he looks at me, he said, and what's your name again? And he said, Brian Barry. He said, any relation to Kevin? He goes, yeah, and my brother. And he said, okay, I'll see you after the presentation is over. And he spoke with him and he said, yes, there was, but they were waiting for confirmation of lab results from swabs taken on the cargo containers. And the next day they announced the results that it was positive for explosives on Pan Am 103.
And that was, of course, it's an incident that a lot of people, I mean, obviously the victims' families don't forget, but in the grand annals of the history of terrorism, people, especially in the modern era, forget about that incident. But that really kickstarted a very troublesome shift, as I mentioned earlier, in terrorism. And we'll dive deeper into it in a moment. And we're talking with retired NYPD first grade detective Kevin Barry here on the Mike Newhaven podcast. This is volume 12 of the miniseries Tales in the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson and explosion and bomb squad. But, and I did not want to let this podcast pass without showing this video. It's 1990, and there is a report of a man with a bomb strapped to his chest, and he's being held down by members of the NYPD's auto crime unit and emergency service cops, because if he has the wires on his vest connect, the bomb's going to go off. And Sergeant Joe Ahern and Detective Barry are the ones that have to go and handle the situation.
He had a pipe bomb up his arm, apparently loaded with C4. He also had 2 live grenades in his pocket.
But sometimes, even now, there is no way for a robot to do the job and no time to put on a bomb suit. A few weeks ago, an alleged kidnapper with a pipe bomb and 2 grenades strapped to him was captured on a Queen street. Emergency service cops and auto crime officers held his arms apart. If the wires he held in each hand touched, the bombs would detonate. Bomb Squad Detective Kevin Barry and Sergeant Joe Ahern went to work to defuse the bombs on the struggling man. Inches from death, with no more protection than a raincoat, they worked in the middle of the street. But when you talk to Kevin Barry or Joe Ahern, they give you that matter-of-fact, all-in-a-day's work patter that seems to come naturally to Bomb Squad members who talk of heroics.
It's more dangerous to be on the outside looking at the bomb business than to be inside and to be knowledgeable about what's going on and have the training and the equipment that builds the confidence to respond to the job. There's a completely different outlook.
But Richard Pastorella knows better. He knows what really goes through their minds, and he's not shy about describing it.
What goes through your mind? Simple. Please, God, let me make the right choice. Let me cut the right wire. Please, let there be enough time. That's what goes through your mind. Are you nervous and scared? More than you could ever imagine. You sweat, your knees literally shake, your hands tremble, especially when you know that the bombs that you're working on work. I'm living proof of that.
That I can't even imagine. I mean, it's scary enough when you have all that equipment to put on and operate, but you're doing that without any of that. So just take me through that night, getting the call, getting there, and working under those type of conditions.
Well, to my recollection, it was about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And we found out later on that this individual had kidnapped a woman, brought her to an ATM, tried to force her to take money out of the ATM, and she wouldn't give him the PIN code. He raped her, threw her in the trunk of the car, and he was driving up in Astoria, I believe, towards the water so that he could dump her over the side. 2 very sharp detectives from the auto crime unit observed the car, noting that it's unusual in this neighborhood to have anybody driving around that late at night when there's very little traffic at all. They followed the vehicle and they waited till he didn't make a full stop at a stop sign. So they had reasonable cause to stop the vehicle because it's required in New York. When they stopped the car, they approached the vehicle. As they did, the woman in the trunk started banging. They heard the banging in the trunk. They drew their weapons on the driver and his accomplice with him. The accomplice complied with the police directions. The driver didn't. He said, "I have a bomb. If I whistle, the bomb will go off." They very quickly shoved a mini mag flashlight into his throat, and they removed him through the window of the car onto the ground. They held him down. They called for help. We heard the call for help come over the citywide radio when we were in Manhattan, and we started out towards the scene immediately. I had worked in the area, so I was familiar. Joe Ahern and I were in the station wagon. We arrived a few minutes before the response vehicle with all the equipment. So when we got there, there was no other option but to go to work without the equipment. We held him down and we started cutting his clothes off layer by layer. And as we got to his upper torso and we cut the sweater off, we found wires around his neck, and the wires went down both arms to the hands. And had he put his hands together, that would have been to complete the circuit and function the device. He had strapped to his neck and shoulder a wire, and that wire was wrapped around the pipe bomb connected to the other wires, and it was held like a sling. We very carefully cut everything, and we found wrapped on the pipe itself was duct tape, and under the duct tape, as we removed it, was the batteries. There were 2 AA batteries. And when I said to Joe Ahern, I said, I think we best cut the negative first because of an incident that occurred a few years earlier in California where 2 bomb techs were killed when they were working on pipe bombs, and it had to do with a negative wire being cut, a positive wire being cut, but then apparently touched on something that was a grounding object, and it caused it to function. We were also concerned with the possibility of electrostatic discharge, ESD, that the static electricity in the winter that you can build up, and when you touch someone, you get a static discharge. That can also cause a device to function. And that was another of our concerns. But as we cut all of the clothing off of him, I turned around and he's yelling at us, "Don't touch me, wait for the bomb squad." I said, "We are the bomb squad." I said, "Where are you from?" And he said to me, "Croatia." I said, "Okay." Now, Croatians were very active in the 70s in other plots and bombings. Is that where he got his idea from? I don't know. But it was success. We had a successful render safe operation. The victim was taken care of, and the perp went to jail.
And Croatian terrorists were the ones that were responsible for the death of Officer Brian Murray. It was
Yes.
them that planted the bomb in the locker at Grand Central Terminal that Officer Murray had removed.
Mhm.
The bomb squad arranged to try to render safe, but it detonated and he was killed. So they, as you said, that they were very, very active during that time. You know, Richie Pastorella was shown at the end of that video, and he was one of the bomb squad members that was gravely injured on New Year's Eve, 1982. I imagine when you're in the middle of working on this, there's no time to think about the fear. But nonetheless, you heard him say what really goes through the mind of a bomb tech. So when this is all over and it sinks in, whoa, I could have gotten killed tonight. Is that when the fear sinks in?
I think afterwards you say, "Whoa, that was a close one." But I think that we had the training necessary. We understood the device, and I think we had the confidence to do it without becoming very fearful. We are concerned about the hazards and the possibilities, but you can't let that deter you when you're working on the explosive device.
Absolutely. And well, you know, hats off to you for doing that. Kevin Barry is our guest here in the Mike Bam podcast. Great time talking with him in episode 99.
So that brings us to February 26, 1993. This is, of course, the game changer in the fight against terrorism. Ramsey Youssef and his cohorts, as I've explained when Bill Ryan was on for volumes 1 and 2 of this miniseries, Tales from the Boom Room, was brought in as the final piece to this puzzle in the attempt to bomb the World Trade Center. These men, part of the men that are responsible for the 93 bombing, were also involved in the slaying of Meyer Kahane in 1990. And after parking this truck filled with explosives, they run away and they watch, waiting for the truck to detonate, and it did underneath the North Tower in the parking garage. Take me through what happened next and your response to it.
As I show some of the photos you sent.
Okay, well, at about 9 a.m., or a little after 9 that day, I was in Reno, Nevada at an international meeting for bomb technicians, and my pager went off. And the office number with 911 after it. I called in, I got Jerry Hogue on the phone, and he said, where are you? How long is it going to take you to get here? I said, I'm in Reno. And he goes, what? Reno, how did I get you? I said, nationwide pager. I said, I'm one of 6 people in the department that has one. And he said, how long is it going to take you? I said, I can be there tomorrow morning. I'll get a flight out today. And that's how I was alerted to the bombing. And the next day at, I guess about 5:30 in the morning, I was in the office in Manhattan. And we responded down to the scene.
That photo that I just showed, that is, which level? Is that the B2 level of the World Trade Center?
Yes, that is, well, it's taken from above, looking through the B2 level down to B6.
So in this bombing, as I mentioned before, my good friend Don Sadawi at one point makes a critical discovery along with Joe Hanlon of the ATF, in which they find the VIN number of this van. Now, you're working on this with the FBI, and this is a federal incident, of course, because, well, before I touch on that, actually, getting down there's another photo here that you showed me, and this will play into our later discussion on the follow-up attack in 2001. Allow me to pull it up in me one moment here as we talk with Kevin Barry here in the Mike Newman podcast. Before I touch on Don's discovery, this particular photo, take me through this, what exactly is happening here?
That was the scene the day after the 93 bombing. And that stayed like that for several weeks with total gridlock in front of the World Trade Center. That's the pedestrian overpass across West Street. And on 9/11, I remembered that scene. And it's probably one of the reasons I'm still here today, is because when I approached the scene, I knew that there was going to be total gridlock in front of the World Trade Center on West Street. And I responded to the northeast corner and set up a command post there on 9/11.
So that brings us, of course, to the response. You have the Port Authority Police, which has jurisdiction over this complex, still does to this day. You have the New York City Fire Department. Understandably, this is a rescue operation. NYPD's there, EMS is there. This is before their merger with the FDNY, but this is the this is the FBI's case, rather. The ATF is also there to assist, but this is the ball's in the FBI's court. And so was it difficult working with them, given the fact that sometimes the NYPD's relationship with the Bureau has been a hostile one?
I don't think it's always been hostile. We had good working relationships with the field agents. And I think the issue is the powers to be at the top is where the conflict begins, and it should end there. But we did very well with field agents. I have a brother that's a retired FBI agent. And, fortunately, he worked in Atlanta most of his career. So he didn't get in my hair.
Shout out to the Bureau. Great work is done left and right. And of course, one of the members of the FBI made the ultimate sacrifice at the Trade Center, who we'll talk about later on 9/11. So that, of course, segues into Don's discovery. Like I mentioned earlier, he's with Joe Hanlon from the ATF, and they get a hold of the VIN number. Now, the FBI's top brass thought that Don jumped the gun. They wanted Don thrown off the case. They said they were going to write a nasty letter to his command in the squad. But this broke the case open because it put together the chain of events that would lead to the capture of it, and then of these bombers, I should say. And there's a funny moment in the book, Bomb Squad: A Year Inside the Nation's Most Exclusive Police Unit, which is how I first found out about you, and part of the reason we're talking today, in that Don shows up to the office, and the guys are hooting and hollering, and they're saying, "You did it, you broke the case," but he's thinking they're busting his chops, and he's not in the mood. He thinks his career is over, but no, he really did break the case. So when he discovered this, and this put together the chain of events that led to the capture of these bombers, take me through, what the mood was like in the office, and of course, getting that sense of somewhat, satisfaction in being able to get justice out of this.
Don didn't interfere with the case. What he did was secure a critical piece of information, evidence-wise, where they were able to bring up the hidden VIN number on it. Don knew that because of his school training in automotives. He knew about hidden VIN numbers and also about training in the police department. There were also rumors afterwards that the reason the FBI was able to track down the rental car to the location in Jersey so quickly was because they had been doing surveillance on them. And apparently the rumor was that the surveillance had dropped. And once they knew the surveillance had dropped, they delivered the vehicle. And that rumor was very strong. And that may have been the cause of the great ruffle of feathers by the FBI superiors that, Don had found the axle with the hidden VIN number, and that the lab people are able to raise the hidden VIN number quickly and identify the fact that the one guy got arrested because he went back for the deposit. He needed the cash to buy a ticket to get out of town. The other two actually escaped the country. Yeah.
Ramzi Youssef was interrogated by foreign authorities who really went to town on him. And he was brought back to the States, and he was convicted eventually in 1997. Now, this is a particularly pivotal point. And this case I will discuss eventually with Paul Yurku when he comes on, hopefully soon. But it's July of 1997. The trial for these bombers, particularly Youssef, is about to begin. Around this time, pipe bombers in Brooklyn are putting together a plot to detonate pipe bombs in the subway. They are thwarted by a very alert roommate who wanted nothing to do with this. He went to two transit cops. They promptly got an interpreter. The interpreter calls up the bomb squad. They go out. ESU comes in, shoots the terrorist because they were trying to set off the bombs to kill the cops and themselves in the process. And Paul and Rich, his partner Rich Teamsma, do great work to get those bombs rendered safe. But the day after, coming into the squad, you have this incident. The trial of the 93 bombers is about to begin. This is I don't want to say a scary time, but again, this is further setting the wheels in motion for what would come in 2001. Take me through, I guess, the intelligence gathering process without giving any tricks of the trade away, of course, and what you thought that meant at that time for the ongoing battle against terrorism and its effect, particularly in New York City.
Well, I thought at that time it was the resurgence again. And, additional cells. Were there any more cells other than the one that was in Brooklyn that was interrupted? We didn't know. Intelligence gathering can be very difficult. Sometimes the agencies you deal with don't share because knowledge is power and they want to have the upper hand. Back in the 80s, I'd say about 83, 84, I had a personal laptop computer, and a retired emergency service police officer, Mike Stapleton, started his own company. He gave me a modem. It was an extra one, so I could hook up my computer in the bomb squad office and correspond with people in London, in France. And I was doing this directly and actually bypassing the intelligence division. And at one time, the CO of the bomb squad came in and said to me, the bulletins you're sending out and the police commissioner gets a copy, the first deputy, Ray Kelly? I said, yeah. He said, well, Ray Kelly asked the head of the intelligence division about an incident that was in your bulletin, and he didn't have an answer or didn't know anything about it. He said, so I'd suggest you stop it because it's not a good career move. So that's some of the things you dealt with in the police department that sometimes were very Neanderthal in their thinking.
And that, of course, I said this before, bureaucracy ruins everything. It really does, because these are in vital operations that we're not talking about getting people to stop littering on a given street. If you want to be a Neanderthal with that, go ahead. It's not really that big of a deal. We're talking about anti-terrorism measures that can prevent not only the destruction of property, but more importantly, the loss of life. And I've never understood that. And it's sad that it took what we'll talk about in a moment for that lesson to be learned. So before I get further into your career in the bomb squad, by this point, mid-90s, you've got some seniority. You've been on the job almost 30 years itself, but you've been in the bomb squad for 13, 14, 15 years. When the new guys are coming in, how would you use the lessons that you learned early on in your career joining the bomb squad to train them?
I would turn around and say to them, you can listen to all the stories, all right? But when it comes down to you working on the device, you have to have the confidence, the self-confidence to know what you're doing and know that you're not going to make a mistake. You have to look at the big picture. You have to be focused on what you're going to do. You have to examine the firing system on the device and decide whether you want to interrupt the power source, interrupt the switch, separate the explosives. What is the safest and simplest way to disable the device and render it safe?
Absolutely. It's very pivotal training. And, obviously this is, as Perricone told me when he was on, you've got to know this craft. Because and there's a joke that Dennis Mulcahy said, it's a little on the morbid side, but it drives the point home. If you cut the right wire, you'll hear it. If you don't cut the right wire, you're never going to hear it.
That's correct.
Yeah, that is correct. That's like I said, a bit of a dark joke, but
It does sum up the role of the bomb technicians perfectly. So